Most people think retirement planning ends when the savings goal is reached. You hit your number, you flip the switch, and the math takes over. It's a reasonable belief. And for a while, it holds. But some of the most expensive retirement costs don't appear in the brochures. They aren't in the standard calculators. And they often don't show up until years after you've already walked away from your career. If you've been tracking your investments, calculating your withdrawal rate, and estimating your monthly expenses, you've done the foundational work. You've built the engine. But an engine can still fail if you haven't accounted for the friction of the road. We tend to focus on what we already know: property taxes, groceries, travel. We worry about market volatility, which is at least a known risk. But the real threat to a 30 or 40-year retirement often lives in the structural costs we assume will stay predictable, and never do. The assumption running quietly through most retirement plans goes something like this. If the savings number is correct, the rest will work itself out. We treat retirement like a destination. Arrive and the work is done. But retirement isn't a static state. It's a multi-decade journey through changing biological, social, and economic phases. And the plans that hold up across that journey aren't the ones built around a single number. They're the ones built around a realistic picture of what that journey actually costs. Here's what most plans miss. Retirement problems rarely come from investment failure alone. They come from expense miscalculation. A portfolio can survive a market downturn. It struggles to survive a fundamental shift in the cost of living that was never in the original spreadsheet. Some of these costs only appear after the first few years of retirement. Some take a decade to surface, and a few only become visible when it's already expensive to fix them. The maintenance escalation. Most retirement budgets include housing, mortgage or rent, property taxes, insurance. What tends to be missing is an honest model for what happens to a home over time. If you retire in the home you've lived in for 15 years, that home is aging at exactly the same rate you are. The roof, the HVAC system, the plumbing, the appliances. Each one has a lifespan, and that lifespan is running out on roughly the same timeline as your retirement. In your peak earning years, a $10,000 or $15,000 repair is an inconvenience. In retirement, it's a capital hit to a finite portfolio. And depending on when it arrives, it can do more damage than the dollar amount alone suggests. These aren't surprise costs. They're certainties that tend to get treated as surprises. The health care gap. Many retirees find that Medicare is not the complete safety net the planning years assumed it would be. There are premiums, deductibles, and the often overlooked costs of dental, vision, and hearing, all of which become meaningfully more expensive as time goes on. Standard Medicare coverage leaves gaps that require either supplemental insurance or direct out-of-pocket spending. The deeper planning problem is the inflation assumption. Most retirement models treat healthcare as a cost that grows with general inflation. Historically, healthcare costs have outpaced general inflation by a significant margin. If that gap isn't built into the plan, purchasing power in the later years of retirement looks very different than it does at the start. For early retirees, those stepping away before Medicare eligibility at 65, the gap is more immediate. Private health insurance during those years can represent one of the largest single-line items in the entire retirement budget. This is a cost that looks manageable in year 1. The challenge is what it looks like in year 14, the family support cost. This is the category most people know exists and plan for least, whether it's helping an adult child with a down payment, supporting a grandchild's education, or assisting an aging parent whose own resources have run out. These costs are real. They're common. And they're almost never in the original retirement model. They're difficult to plan for because planning for them requires acknowledging them explicitly. And that can feel uncomfortable. But the retirees who navigate family financial support most successfully tend to be the ones who worked out their own framework in advance, a clear internal sense of what they can comfortably provide without compromising their own stability. Building that framework before retirement, when there's no immediate emotional pressure, is considerably easier than building it in the middle of a situation that already has weight behind it. Financial independence is built through clarity, not optimism, and clarity requires acknowledging that your family's financial health has a connection to your own. It's the sequence of returns, sensitivity. There's a structural risk that doesn't get enough attention in standard retirement planning conversations. When an unexpected large expense, a major medical event, a significant home repair, an unplanned family need, arrives in the first 3 to 5 years of retirement during a period of market weakness, the effect on the portfolio is disproportionate to the dollar amount. It's not just the money spent, it's the shares sold at a low point to cover that expense. Those shares don't participate in the recovery. That withdrawal creates a permanent reduction in the portfolio's long-term capacity, one that a later market rebound can partially, but not fully, offset. This is why maintaining liquid reserves or a cash buffer in retirement isn't simply a psychological comfort. It's a structural protection against being forced to sell assets at the worst possible moment to cover a cost that could have been anticipated. The plan that looks sustainable on paper can be meaningfully altered by a single, poorly timed withdrawal in the early years. Longevity drift. This is the cost category that carries the most long-term financial weight and receives the least planning attention. There is a specific risk that early retirees and long-horizon planners face. The longer you are retired, the more cost exposure you accumulate across every category above. In a 10-year retirement, you might replace your car once. In a 35-year retirement, you'll do it 4 or 5 times. You'll renovate. You'll update. You'll replace things you didn't expect to replace, repeatedly across decades. The most expensive retirement costs often aren't monthly bills. They're the decade-scale replacements that feel like emergencies, but are actually structural certainties arriving on a longer timeline than we naturally plan for. And the longer the retirement, the more exposure to healthcare cost escalation, family support events, housing maintenance, and long-term care risk. Each decade adds a new layer of financial complexity. This is the compounding effect that lives on the spending side of the equation, and it rarely appears in the standard calculator. Now here's the reframe that changes how this all fits together. Retirement security isn't just about hitting a number. It's about designing a spending structure that can absorb what you didn't plan for and keep functioning anyway. During the accumulation years, our attention goes to the top line: net worth, portfolio balance, savings rate. As retirement approaches, the focus has to shift. The question stops being how much have you built and becomes how resilient is the structure underneath it. A financial architect doesn't just optimize for a target balance. They map the full cost landscape. They build margin for the irregular, the delayed, and the underestimated. They design for the reality of retirement, not the brochure version of it. The strongest retirement plans are not the ones with the highest balances. They're the ones with the fewest blind spots. The 5 categories covered here: maintenance escalation, healthcare gaps, family financial support, sequence of returns, sensitivity, and longevity drift, aren't rare outcomes. They're structural features of most long retirements, and some arrive early. Some take years to surface, but the time to account for them is before they do. A retirement plan that looks honestly at the full expense picture, that builds margin for what it doesn't know and flexibility for what it can't predict, is a more durable plan than one optimized only for what's already been modeled. The goal was never a perfect number. It was always a plan with fewer blind spots and the clarity to see what optimism tends to leave out.